Alex Ansary here. It is July 23rd, 2016. I am joined again by Kyle Rearden. In this podcast, we're going to discuss how the narrative has shifted from the time of Ron Paul, which attracted the attention of, it brought a lot of people together. Not even people that would necessarily describe themselves to be libertarians, but people that felt that message, which we'll reflect on. And now we're seeing some of those same people compromised and directed into the direction of Donald Trump. We heard anybody but Bush. Now it's anybody but Obama, anybody but Hillary. And so we've seen a major shift, and we're talking about, a variety of things from domestic surveillance, but most of all, foreign policy. And Trump says one thing one day, and then the next, he's talking about we're going to kill all those barbarians. In a day and age where it's a reported fact that 9 out of 10 of the drone attacks have killed civilians. So Kyle, you've been involved in the liberty movement for a number of years. What are some of the strongest contrasts, differences between then and now that you're seeing?
Well, just to focus on, icons and specifically contrasting, Donald Trump with Ron Paul, I think is what we're kind of doing here, at least in some ways. Well, geez, yeah, it's kind of a marked difference, isn't it? Because I remember Ron Paul's political platform being really three planks, right? It was bring the troops home. I think it was end the Fed, meaning abolishing the Federal Reserve, if I remember correctly. And then, of course, it was repeal the Patriot Act. And there were some other looser promises about rolling back the police state, but the specific focal point was repealing the Patriot Act. Those three things were pretty much the Ron Paul platform. Some other topics and some other things got brought up, but those are the three key things that Ron Paul always came back to, that really formed his base. Now, with Donald Trump, let's see, I haven't heard one peep about the Federal Reserve, whether it's abolishing it or auditing it, which is the moderate position, or even mentioning it at all. I haven't heard one word about the police state. I haven't heard one word about the evils of NSA's dragnet wiretapping or indiscriminate surveillance more generally, as Edward Snowden leaked about 3 years ago in 2013. I haven't heard one word about really anything of substance. And in fact, regarding the more anti-war position, Donald Trump is basically the Hillary pro-war position in terms of let's invade more countries, let's conduct more of these so-called not-so-humanitarian overseas missions with bombing innocent men, women, and children of various ethnicities and so forth. So, Donald Trump's the liberty candidate. I don't know where some of these anarchists like Jeffrey Tucker get off by saying that Trumpism is kind of where it's at. But that's kind of disconcerting, isn't it, when you've got people who claim to be libertarians suddenly throwing any semblance of principles or values or even, if we're getting a little philosophical here, axioms, throwing all of that stuff out the window completely because the winds of political expediency have changed direction.
Absolutely. And I would also add that, Ron Paul's been around a lot longer, even before 9/11. He was in Congress, and there were police issues that he was discussing then with regards to the drug war. He was even on, the show in the 1980s, one of the tabloid shows, arguing against the police state, incarcerating all of these people over these manufactured laws and basically being screamed at the audience as someone that was supporting anarchy. And it was definitely hyped up. And I think that was like 1988, 1989. What's always disappointed me personally is when I've seen people, look, I'm not a guy that worships Ron Paul. And I told you during the break between the podcasts that I think that he he threw the election in 2012 to the direction of Romney getting the RNC. Doesn't make him a bad guy, but I think that was basically the end of the Ron Paul movement. Then that would be the summer of 2012, that same time period where he endorsed Ted Cruz. But has Ron Paul done more good than questionable things like compromises, like, connections to Ted Cruz and promoting him so he can help out Rand Paul? And the answer is yes. And Ron Paul brought a lot of people together that were ultimately anti-war on the Libertarian side. You know, it's too bad that the Democrats and some of the Ron Paulers couldn't have been more on the same page. There was a lot of unjust accusations on the part of aspects of the left that Ron Paul was a racist. And it's really unfortunate that at that time, you know, I'm reminiscing, but that was a really good time to bring the country together. And so, you know, I remember watching those debates, and it was much more real then in 2012, even though it was staged to a certain degree. But Ron Paul was discussing surveillance, you know, and he was discussing all these other things, and these countries being bombed. And, you know, some of us see more of the false flag aspect of the blowback, but Ron Paul would discuss, you know, these people are living this way because of what's been done to them, you know, and then he would be booed and whatnot. And we're not seeing conversations like that now. Now, with all these events that are conveniently here, it's who can make America safe, you know, and
Yeah, I feel the grip of the police state gripping tighter than even back in 2008 when the bailouts happened. And yeah, when you were referencing that appearance that Ron Paul made, that was back in 1988 on the Morton Downey Jr. show, and the topic was about narcotics prohibition, more commonly known as the drug war. And yes, it was interesting. You mentioned he was being accused of being all sorts of things. It's like, wow, man. If those people hate Ron Paul, then they'll definitely want to put my head on a pike because, you know, hell, I've changed my political ideology recently, not in a huge fundamental way. I'm still a libertarian, but I've stopped being a polyarchist, which is the belief in a free market and governance and choosing your own government based on consent. I've gone from that to being what is known as a vanuist, which is trying to attempt to achieve as close to invulnerability to coercion as possible, not relying on laws, but instead relying on free market technology and other methods for not being squished by the police state. And it's an ongoing experiment, and a lot of that traces back to the 60s. But yeah, it's just kind of Ron Paul is a symbol, you know, in a lot of ways. How like other people or even certain fictional vigilantes have been symbols. And the symbol that he really represented was the stereotypical libertarian, or at least in one sense. And so the vitriol that he received, I think, was in a lot of ways unwarranted. Yes, I've had my own disagreements with Ron Paul about other things. Perhaps that's a topic for another time. But what I don't like are people misrepresenting what he stood for. And you're right, he was accused of a lot of stuff that actually, on the one thing regarding the alleged racism in the newsletters, those specific articles were written by other people. More likely than not, it was probably Lou Rockwell. But in any case, it wasn't Ron Paul. It was just his newsletter with his name on it, even though he had contributing writers and so forth. So it's very interesting to watch how the vitriol, the virtual spitting on Ron Paul has been virtually forgotten. And now there's Trump, where basically his even the opposition, the alleged opposition to Trump, is almost downright respectful by comparison to the opponents of Ron Paul, almost in some ways.
Yes, and what's the most significant thing to mention at this point with regards to the contrast in the characters of Trump and Paul? Paul is the only candidate that I can think of in my lifetime that, I mean, his philosophy of, you know, regarding the golden rule. I mean, even if someone's not a Christian, they can grasp, and, you know, from the atheists as well, what Ron Paul was saying. There was a lot of stuff regarding the golden rule in subtle ways with regards to foreign policy. With Trump, I see do as thou wilt, that which people might identify to be Satanism. We're going to go after the barbarian. Is this the same person that people think is a 9/11 truther? Trump has gotten away with using buzzwords and just enough, and just a few quotes in the media, and that to be used as pro-Trump propaganda. Oh, Trump was against going into Iraq. Is Trump really against these wars now? He obviously is not going to go after the barbarians. Okay, so you're going to go after the CIA? the ISI, Saudi Arabia, the Mossad, all these other groups that are in actuality behind ISIS. And I'm not necessarily going to leave Russia's dabbling out of this. I mean, they were in Afghanistan for a decade. Russia has history in the Middle East. So, the differences go on and on and on. Okay, so we have a drug war that Ron Paul was calling out. The ultimate police state candidate, Donald Trump, hasn't made any statements about curtailing the drug war. He's calling for like a new brand of law and order, version of law and order that we have never seen before.
Yeah, in fact, actually, he's been really promoting how wonderful the government police are. And there's also been a certain other individual who used to mention about, hey, we may have to shoot the police in self-defense at some indeterminate point in the future, which is free speech pursuant to the Brandenburg v. Ohio case. So those of us in the alternative media can say things like that, and it's free speech, by the way, for people who don't know. There is case precedent for that, so we're okay. As long as there's no incitement, no specific threats against individuals, people can talk about revolution until they're blue in the face, by the way, as a matter of law. But yes, there was a particular individual who used to talk about shooting cops in self-defense, and recently some videos were up, and now he's saying how wonderful the police are, and go vote for Donald Trump.
More specifically, like take big bloody chunks out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, like that type of rhetoric. So the
but it's the switch. It's the switch, though. That's the problem.
Right.
If
the psychopath down in Austin doesn't care how many people that he stepped on that were his initial supporters. We've seen, I think, a really big shift, rotation from his old listeners to the people that have just found him. And the thing is, the whole schizophrenic nature of society now, it's like, are these people that would support the things he was saying 5 years ago?
No, of course not.
Are they now able to see that he flip-flopped, that he was, so, I mean, there's a lot of like, what was interesting is, real quick, Joe Biggs was playing Alex's voice through a smartphone, through a megaphone, congratulating the Portland State University Trump supporters for, participating in the stage-managed election and all the emotionalism. I salute you over and over and over. And what was funny is the look on the girls, some of these teenage hottie girls that were there with their Trump boyfriends, they looked so like, oh my God, we are associated with him. That's right, honey. You are absolutely now associated with Donald Trump. How does it feel? Because obvious on your face that you know that voice and you don't like that dude. But guess what? You're supporting something that he's supporting. And now you guys can be on the same side. How does that feel? Yeah, it feels a little awkward. Oh, no, just forget about it. I'm sure it's nothing. I'm sure it's nothing. Just shrug it away and just hold up your little wall sign. Looks so sexy with that dress. Build a wall. And I'm telling you, man, it's scary because they are setting humans against each other for the streets. And I didn't see Ron Paul ever do anything even remotely like that, nor his supporters, which I megaphoned alongside. I was actually fairly involved in the Dallas Ron Paul group in 2012, filming their events. And I saw that groupthink. When I spoke out against Ron Paul promoting Cruz, I was seen as maybe some sort of potential infiltrator.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, too, that it didn't matter when Penny Freeman went public. One of his former campaign staffers went public, and I wrote about this. She went public about the fact that, yeah, there were some of these weird endorsements with Ted Cruz and some other folks, more GOP establishment insiders. And then she got all weepy at one point with the interview she did with Adam Kokesh, and she admitted that she doesn't know if Ron Paul was kind of deliberately deceiving everybody from the very beginning in terms of gaining donation money and all that. But what she did know for certain is that his portfolio had grown. So there was kind of an open question that was left open that Kokesh decided not to pursue any farther.
And that's another deeper discussion, the shift of Adam versus the man, a person that I would never consider myself ever to be a fan of. And, at one point I kind of marveled at some of the things that he was doing for publicity. Adam the man.
Well, remember Adam Kokesh, the
But
only reason he gained any prominence in the
right,
alternative media at all was because he gave that speech back in, I think it was 2007, 2008, during
it
the.
was epic. It was an epic speech, and it was
Mm-hmm.
in D.C.
Yes,
And
and he was a Ron Paul. It was at a Ron
right,
Paul event, and he was a Ron Paul guy. And it was only later, a few years later, that he decided to go more anarchic. But now he's like doing his own political campaign in 2020, running for president to allegedly
exactly.
disorderly dissolution of the federal government, which of course doesn't make sense because if you're an anarchist, it doesn't make sense. It would be like an atheist joining a church and becoming part of the clergy, even though he doesn't believe in God. I mean, that's the kind of schizo, split personality, I think is how you phrased it, kind of thing going on here.
Well, we talked about that overarching theme of that time period of 2011, 2012, 2013, and a lot of people shifting,
mm,
even before Trump came on the stage. And with
yeah.
Adam, what stands out is the whole call to arms, the March on DC. I mean,
Oh,
on the Alex Jones show and the promotion of that, to him, them doing it by himself in a show of, I mean, I don't know. It was pretty bizarre. It was pretty, and it was sad what happened to them. The whole story about, their rights being violated when the police kicked the door in.
mm-hmm.
But anyway, it was that period that I stopped subscribing to his channel because I don't believe in subscribing or listening to people that are using their platform to lead people under some umbrella.
Yeah.
And if he's running for president in 2020, and he's also talking about anarchy, but also created an incident that could have ended in bloodshed.
Yeah.
And more like the fact that he stated multiple times he's just there to be a propagandist. He did this more when he was in with RT, when he was confronted about, receiving a check from RT.
I think he even said the term propagandist a few times, like, I am a propagandist. I think he even admitted it, if I
Yeah,
remember correctly. Yeah.
that's right. And then I remember posting that and showing that to people. Oh, so yeah. And so now he's an off the gritter. Now he's an aspiring off the gritter, and he has his own little stuff going on with code enforcement.
I think he's copycatting you actually, because it's seen, if you look at like the time frame, it's almost like he might actually, for all he might be a part of your audience and ripping your ideas off in a sense. It's quite possible that remember, because people who are very manipulative will look at certain trends, even in certain so-called niche industries or interests, and they'll mimic the people who really are the pioneers, who really are forward-looking, but may not be as well known, at least in some ways. And then they'll mimic that. They'll sensationalize it. They'll spin it, twist it, pervert it, and then all of a sudden, oh, this is the biggest new fad on Twitter or something. And I've seen that happen way too many times, where there'll be a perverted copying. I don't believe in intellectual property, so people can, copy things that are in the public domain as far as I'm concerned. But what I don't like is intellectual dishonesty, and I don't like it when people take other people's ideas and then fail to attribute it, because that is plagiarism. And plagiarism is a form of fraud, which is a form of theft, which of course violates the non-aggression principle, which I live by. So, I mean,
Well, I don't know with regards to that. I will say this, then we'll come back to Ron Paul. I met him briefly in 2012 at the RNC. It was the Veterans for Ron Paul camp, where the RV that I was staying in, it was a rented RV. We went from Dallas when I was living there at the time. This was towards the end of my stay in Dallas, Texas, right before finding Costilla County for the first time. So a few months before Costilla County for the first time in late 2012, I'm at the Veterans for Ron Paul camp, and I'm documenting. I actually have an RNC playlist if anybody's curious. So I just remember how cold he was, and actually trying to talk to him and meet him. And I saw people worshiping him. And I know he's going through a lot of emotional stuff then, because he was, I forget exactly what the controversy was on his channel at that exact moment. But he was very much on the defensive, didn't want to do an interview, kind of glared at me for trying to interview him. So that I will now put on record, and it left a bad taste in my mouth. And I did interview him when he was running for Congress. And I've had close friends become obsessed with Adam Kokesh. So it hasn't been an ego thing. It's been seen more or less someone that is a returning soldier that, started a platform about being against the man, who in reality has really been more self-serving than anything else. And I would like to see, so, we do like to end on a solution action oriented. And it does seem to come down to more people getting involved. I'd like to see more veterans that have served in the Afghan and Iraqi wars, not just do a speech in 2011, 2003 for Amy Goodman about how they tortured people and felt so bad about it. Where are those guys now? Are they okay? Have they dealt with their PTSD? Adam's talked a lot about his PTSD. You know what it really comes from? Some of these people have hurt people. Adam has admitted to torturing people. It's hard for me to respect a man that has admitted to torture while he's serving and hasn't really used his platform other than buzzwords to really discuss what's been going on with the victims of war. So, instead of like veterans looking up to Adam Kokesh, they should speak out, and specifically about the things that were done to innocent people, because they know things and they bury things. And for some reason, this country and our society has allowed it to be a taboo subject. And I think if people really want to heal from their PTSD and, marijuana addiction, that could follow. And I think that, there's something wrong with marijuana. I think that people are looking for easy way outs for their PTSD. And I think the reality is, expression of speech, get right with God. Fix your errors. Try to do what's right. Try to right what was wrong. And how do we do that in this day and age nonviolently? Communication. So, there's a lot of, also getting back to Ron Paul, disenfranchised Ron Paulers that are not on the Trump bandwagon. People, we need you. We need you to join us, and not join us necessarily like an Evil Dead manner, but in a good manner. Join us. Help us build websites. Kyle and I are working tirelessly, but we're both in agreement that we really need to stay on the individual path. We may collaborate, but we're individuals because we're disturbed by what we're seeing from the herd. Some of you feel the same way as us, and you put a lot of effort, and some of you put a lot of money into the Ron Paul campaign. We're not here to beat up Ron Paul. We did not just do that, but we did discuss how all this stuff has shifted. And so, think outside the box of those feelings. Well, if Ron Paul, you remember that? If Ron Paul doesn't win, that's the end. I don't know what I'm going to do. People are getting all emotional.
Or there was a phrase called "No one but Paul." I remember that. That was a money bomb fundraiser by that specific name, and that's actually now archaic.
Left the Liberty movement after that, and that's sad because they believe that, and that's let's stay away from those type of fundamentalist worldviews and keep moving forward with our lives. Whether you're in your 50s, moving to your 60s, I'm going to be 37 next year, and now 11 years in the alternative media. But 11 years in the alternative media has shown me how many politicians will come and go, how many people will get behind them, vote fraud, electoral fraud, people saying one thing and doing another. So if you understand that, and that the individual is where we need to focus our self-responsibility, then there is no only Ron Paul for president. There's what do we do to bring liberty, colonies of liberty, as a response to what's happening. If we don't do that, and if we don't, get involved in our communities or get involved online and share a greater understanding of liberty, we're going to see this artificial liberty movement through Trump, which it already is, rise and rise and rise, and pull people in because, this is more speculating on our nature as man. We know that people naturally fall into hierarchies, some more than others. And Donald Trump is on a primitive, instinctual level, filling a void, a leader rising out of the ashes. It's actually quite Antichrist-like if you look at it from another perspective. And you don't have to be a biblical person to look at it from that perspective. And you can also see multiple Antichrists, that are deceivers, and not just one. And so I think that's what we're seeing here. And, it's like that phrase, if you see something, say something. So I just want to encourage everybody to keep a genuine liberty movement moving forward because it has no leader. It's completely organic. Liberty movement, those are English words, but the idea is people responding to the tyranny with a spiritual response. We own ourselves. We don't have certain rights to trespass upon others, shut down traffic. Oh, we're going to have a protest and shut down traffic and stomp on cars. A true liberty person doesn't have the mentality, we're going to ban all these people because we destabilized this region. That is the complete opposite of liberty. Finishing up this point, and I've said it before, they demonized the liberty movement well over a decade ago, even beyond Waco. But, we saw the Ron Paul stickers demonized. Missouri State Police report. Oh, Alex Jones is exposing the Missouri State Ron Paul supporters. Watch your back. The cops are after you. Like, we all remember those days. And in reality, I think the Ron Paulers, they did all right. Most Ron Paulers got through the last decade having their head blown off while we were told to be so afraid and even told they were going to assassinate Ron Paul. Well, we've survived that, and we need to get through all this fake news and hype over these politicians and whether or not they're going to be killed. And they're doing the same thing with Trump. And organically push all those ideas forward. That includes local currencies. That includes local food. That includes local organizations. What if there is no police? How do people cooperatively work together to make sure that people's rights are not being violated while preventing a police state from taking place, while preventing a dictator? So, yeah, those are some of my closing thoughts. The liberty movement is an organic, spiritual, intellectual movement that has no leader. It has people that rally around her, people that rally around certain people. But it's not about those people. It's about what we're doing in our daily lives.
Yeah, and if people really realize that leaderless resistance really is the best way to go. You're in charge of your own life. No one else is in charge of you. And so, yes, I guess there is a certain amount of genuine tolerance you should have for people's eccentricities or idiosyncrasies and whatnot. But in a lot of ways, it's really that responsibility for your own actions and so forth and what flows from that, which is also at least equally important. So the problem with looking up to a archon in the sense of a ruler or a wannabe ruler, really a tyrant, is that you're giving up your own personal power. You are giving up your sense of identity, and you're also giving up, most interestingly, and you can see this from a lot of the government police, the sense of their own individual responsibility. Oh, don't get mad at me, civilian. I'm a police officer. I was just following orders. And so for every one of you listeners who has always kind of, your skin crawls whenever you've heard a cop said, I'm just following orders, maybe you should kind of take that to heart in the sense that maybe you yourselves should not act like a police officer in terms of offsetting your own, sense of responsibility onto others for whatever reasons, and instead be better than them. Be responsible. Take ownership for your own thoughts, your own feelings, and probably most importantly, your own actions. And just realize that, hey, look, worst case scenario for some people, even if certain people got bumped off or otherwise thrown in a government dungeon or some other equally nasty thing happened, just like Alex said, organically, other folks will spring up who actually have some appreciation for freedom. There's been an idea that's been promoted by two other Texans, which is an interesting idea, which is known as freedom cells. And I would suggest people at least consider that as one option among others for how to, dare shall I say, leaderlessly organize, which might be a bad way of putting it, but at least an interesting turn of phrase, possibly, that people may want to consider in terms of getting to know your neighbors, getting to know the people around you in your own life, and try to encourage, each other to do certain things, whether that is everything ranging from using encrypted communications to food storage to, whatever you think in terms of direct action, the economic means of making money as opposed to the political means of making money, to voluntarily secure each other's liberty in a mutually beneficial manner. And that, I think, Alex, is where the future is going.
Well said. And for those listening, if you enjoyed this podcast, share it with others. My website, alexansary.tv. Subscribe if you're new. Kyle's website, thelastbastille.com, thelast, BASTLLE.com. And we'll be back with more podcasts.